Hello everyone and welcome to Sci-Fi Zone, where we celebrate science fiction movies and TV shows from the past, the present and the future. I'm here today with Claire and H, and we're coming to you from the wonderful store of Alternate Worlds. It's very, very exciting stuff, what can I say? Later on, we're going to be talking about Star Trek Discovery, but first, like they always do in the TV shows, we're going to talk about something completely different, because last month it was something very, very special, and H is just chewing at the bit to tell you all about it. So H, stop chewing at the bit and tell us all about it.
Well, last month was the 50th anniversary of the moon landing, Apollo 11. And I thought it might be interesting to sort of look at where Apollo 11 is actually featured in science fiction. So one of the earliest ones I could find was actually Battlestar Galactica, the original series, episode Hand of God. They've been trying to track down a transmission from Earth. And then at the point that they're not looking, background of a screen, the moon landing. And they've actually missed it, their chance to find out where Earth is. Independence Day, opening scene.
Yes.
Big cruisers coming over the moon, shadow over the site.
And the footprint goes...
That's it, the famous footprint.
The vibration,
Vibrations in space, let's not go there, that's not going to work. But
first,
you can actually see the footprint being destroyed. And then the footprint makes another comeback, Enterprise. Opening credits.
Course,
That's
yes.
Star Trek Enterprise, for those
That
who are wondering what
rather
Enterprise...
slightly dodgy comp of the foot coming off but leaving the footprint. But the other thing there is Enterprise in a mirror darkly. The Terran Empire makes it to the moon first. You actually see the different flag on the moon.
If you're a Star Trek fan right now, you'd be sitting there going, that is just fantastic. I love it. I love it. Give me more. What else you got?
Transformers.
It's more than meets the eye.
Transformers Dark of the Moon. It's actually, I don't know if it's an Autobot or a Decepticon ship, crashes on the moon in the early 60s. The space race is actually to go and find this spacecraft. It's not actually a prestige thing between the Russians and the Americans. There's a prize there. So Armstrong and Aldrin are on the moon, their transmission cuts out and they bounce just over from the lunar module and there's this massive crash spacecraft. Conspiracy theories abound.
I love it.
Like that one. Doctor Who, 2005 version. Matt Smith's story. Day of the Moon. You got the Silence, this mysterious enemy that can make you forget everything. So the Doctor comes up with a scheme to plant a suggestion in the moon landing footage so that people can actually see the silence. Turn on the film. So, Interstellar.
Golly.
The moon landings were fakes, and apparently this is what they're teaching in schools now.
Yeah, it's a bit like Capricorn 1, yes, exactly right.
But they're teaching that it was actually America's way of making the USSR bankrupt by forcing them into a space race that was never there. And also, one of the models that gets knocked off Murphy's shelf is actually the LEM.
Oh, golly.
If you look closely. Men in Black.
Oh, we discussed Men in Black a couple of episodes ago.
But Men in Black 3, the time travel story. Time travel.
Okay.
Go on, say, Claire, you love time travel stories.
I love a good time travel
Okay,
story.
2 weeks.
The big boss fight at the end of Men in Black 3 is actually on the launch gantry for Apollo 11.
Oh, God.
And the more recent one that I could find was Timeless TV show. Did you watch that one?
No, I've seen bits of it, but not
Seen
much.
bits of it. It was good, but they actually do one where Flynn, the villain in season 1, is going to basically disrupt the Apollo 11 moon landing by botching their communications.
Oh, wow.
Manages to plant a virus in the old computer systems.
Oh, hang on.
Is that even
yeah,
possible?
Exactly. But they somehow managed to get a virus into the computer systems back then.
Houston, they had a problem.
And then our heroes have to team up with one of the actual figures who was one of the programmers behind the scenes on Apollo 11 to save the day.
Oh, how
But there we go. Few examples where Apollo 11 has turned up.
Far out. That is very
cool.
impressive. What does that tell you about H? He's a bit of a dude. I love it. Absolutely fantastic. So I have no idea what to say after all that.
I've got him speechless for once.
Wow.
Yes.
That's an
Oh,
achievement.
good. It's probably a good thing too. Exactly right. So there you go. So if you did celebrate the Apollo 11 moon landings last month, go and watch some of these shows One, to just relive the experience through the eyes of a science fiction fan, and two, just to confirm that H is actually correct, because it would be funny if you said, "Oh no, he's wrong," and I find that highly unlikely, by
So
the
do
way.
I.
So, very, very, very good stuff. Well, while you get your Apollo 11 fix, we'll be back after these messages. Don't go away.
Alternate Worlds has been specialising in comics and collectibles for over 40 years, with a back issue collection of over 500,000 comics covering the golden age right through to latest releases, including signed and slabbed gems. They also have an enormous graphic novel collection, one of the largest ranges of manga in the country, as well as toys, statues and pops, and new items are arriving every Wednesday. Each month, Alternate Worlds hosts its own premium comic day, where all the rare treasures are put on display for inspection and purchase. The store also runs regular tournaments and competitions for both comic and gaming fans. And for local and interstate and international buyers, the Alternate Worlds website features their complete range of products, so whether you come in online or in store, visit them soon.
Welcome back. One of the big hot ticket items that is going around at the moment is Star Trek Discovery. There's been a lot of Star Trek movies in the past few years, and they eventually got around to making a new TV series, a Discovery, which has set the world on fire, so to speak. So I know it's a very, very interesting topic, or a very key topic, or a personal topic to both H and Claire. So I'm going to kick this one off with Mr. H. What have you got to talk about with regards to Star Trek Discovery? Because we actually had disagree on a couple of things regarding this, but there you go. You go first.
Where do we start? I mean, some new TV Star Trek for the first time since, when did Enterprise finish? 2005?
Somewhat that, yeah.
2005. I mean, we've had the reboot movies, but that's the movies. We'll leave those alone. Originally, I think it was Brian Fuller was going to be the showrunner, but he dropped out before the first episode was actually broadcast, and Alex Kurtzman came along and took over. The nice thing they've done with the Discovery is they've gone back in time and reused the design. Originally, before Star Trek the Motion Picture, there was going to be Star Trek Planet of the Titans. And they got both Ken Adam, who was a designer for the Bond films, and Ralph McQuarrie to come up with a new design for the Enterprise. And when that first teaser trailer came out for Discovery, it was sort of the revelation that they've gone back and reused this design.
Yeah, it was, if you know your history, you'll notice
You know
that.
your history, and that's been something with Discovery I think they've done. They've respected the history but updated things.
Yep.
You had the first two-part episode, The Vulcan Hello and Battle of the Binary Stars, to introduce you to a slightly different version of Trek.
Just a bit.
Yeah, it was a very different angle for Star Trek. Very different angle for Star Trek. Normally it's been about, well, the ship has always been sort of the focus, and in this, the ship that we were expecting wasn't even in the first episode at all, was it?
No, it came in the second episode, which was the third, if you will.
That was, and having it focused on someone who was not in command and not doing what we would expect a Starfleet officer to do was a real big change. Yeah. And we knew ahead of time that it wasn't going to be about the captain, that it wasn't going to focus on the captain. And that was one of the things that I found the most interesting about it, that it was going to be focusing on someone who wasn't necessarily in charge of things, which is sort of what it's always been. I mean, it's always a bit of an ensemble cast and everyone gets their stories and gets their piece. But the focus of this is quite different.
I mean, Burnham, Starfleet's first mutineer.
Yes, very first.
But it's someone trying to do the wrong thing, but for the right reasons. I mean, introduce this idea that her talking to her adoptive father, Sarek, about how did the Vulcans handle the Klingons. And basically they're saying, we shot first. And this is sort of another view of another thing. You're suddenly out of whack of, hang on, Vulcans shooting first, what's going on here? But then it fits in with that whole thing that they built off with the Klingon sense of honor. And in a way, you've got to win that honor from the Klingons. But within those first two episodes, we're plunged into a war.
Yeah.
And this is very different for Star Trek. Hang on a minute, we're in the middle of a war footing. I mean, Enterprise was meant to eventually deal with the Earth-Romulan War. That we never got to see that. It's almost as if they picked up that sort of thing and said, well, we can introduce this element at this point. So you end up with a new Klingon conflict.
Yeah.
And again, we're dealing with different Klingons as well.
Yeah, the Klingons threw me, I have to say. They really threw me when they first appeared. The way they look, I mean, I don't have any particular objection to changing those sorts of things for shows. Like some people get all upset because, you know, this is not what Star Trek looked like in the beginning. I don't have an objection to those sorts of changes happening, but it was an extreme change. And a lot of people were complaining about the fact that they were speaking Klingon.
Which was
that they had to read
kind of
subtitles.
ridiculous. I think it kind of helped that in Star Trek Into Darkness, they already had redesigned the Klingons, so we just got another redesign on top of the redesign.
It wasn't actually that far from the Into Darkness version, I thought. I mean, they done more with it. Was interesting now that they went with full body prosthetics and actually altered even things like the neck and the hands they've done. But I mean, we've had multiple Klingon reboots from the original show into the motion picture and then the Kelvinverse ones and now this. I'd say that sometimes the Klingon stuff in season 1 was where the show became a little unstuck. It sort of slowed down. The first 2 episodes, as you say, could almost be a pilot movie for a different series, because then you come in with episode 3, and now we're introduced to the Discovery. Now we're introduced to Lorca. Now we're introduced to the Spore Drive. And it was almost like going off in a slightly different direction. You set up this situation with the first 2 episodes, and then we sort of come in different in the third episode.
You've set up the start of a war, and then you've taken the action away from that. I mean, yes, they talk about the war, and yes, they're trying to win the war, but they're not in the war. It was a big jump.
It was a big jump. I mean, Lorca as a captain, I really liked. Even though we eventually find out that he's not Prime Universe Lorca, he's Mirror Universe Lorca. Jason, I mean, I've liked Jason Isaacs as an actor anyway. He's turned up in a lot of genre movies and bits and pieces like that. But he brought an interesting air to the character. I mean, part of the thrust of first season, I think, is how does someone who's an explorer, a scientist, cope with war? And you're looking at the characters there, they're scientists, they're discussing science. I mean, Stamets seeing his idea for the Spore Drive basically taken away and turned into a weapon. And now in Discovery, we're having these people who are meant to be originally signing up to Starfleet to be explorers, expecting to be warriors.
Yeah, I mean, there's a line in one of those first few episodes that's saying exactly that. You know, we're supposed to be explorers. We're not supposed to be soldiers. It's quite interesting,
But it was the Starfleet side of things interesting. The Klingon stuff, it tended to slow down. You could see what they were trying to do. Establish a newer version of the Klingons. We've got the multiple houses, but the multiple houses have their own agendas. So there's all this politics in there. And in effect, the multiple houses have their slightly different appearances. So they were trying to say that the different Klingons, they're from different houses and things.
There's enough similarity that you can tell they're all the same species. But sort of family differences almost.
I mean, it was good. It's almost like the Klingons have been matured from the movie versions and especially the TV versions, and I actually found their aggressive tendencies actually worked out quite well, and the fact that they did speak Klingon was really good to hear, because that's how that would normally be. And
did you notice how they managed that really well? They didn't actually. They start speaking English at the point where the translator is actually introduced. I don't know if you noticed that. But they speak Klingon, and when there's no translator, when there's no human with a translator there, they're still speaking Klingon. They still go back to that with the captions. I love that they went to that much detail about it.
It was good to see. The thing you mentioned, like the Mirror Universe earlier, I was really surprised that they focused so much on the Mirror Universe for the first season, because I thought if you're a brand new viewer to Star Trek Discovery, you've never seen any Star Trek before, you'll have no idea what's going on. It's like, what is the Mirror Universe?
Most of us had no idea what was going on anyway.
I think the Mirror Universe was partially used to further explore what we said about explorers to warriors.
Yeah.
Because now you're actually thrust into a culture where
But
it
no.
is a warrior, they are
but
the warriors
it was
and not
working
the
on the
explorers.
assumption, but it was working on the assumption that you already knew what the mirror universe was. Okay.
Not necessarily.
That's how I interpret it. It's not like they took it from the point of view of a first-time viewer. It was like Star Trek fans are going, oh my goodness, it's the mirror universe. We remember that from the original series and whatever else in Deep Space Nine.
Yeah.
But I thought for a first-time viewer, they're going to be going, what the hell is the mirror universe?
Well, a first-time viewer is going to be looking at this as a science fiction show, not as Star Trek. And the way it was very clear the shift into the mirror universe. Like that was a very deliberate action. It wasn't just sort of
It was
all
a
of a
way
sudden
home.
we're
It
there.
was basically Lorca
Yeah.
had been building up the spore
Exactly.
drive to try and find a way home.
Yeah,
so.
and it was very clear that we had gone from one universe into another. And I think that would be enough for the non-Star Trek fans. I think that would be enough. But the other thing to remember, of course, is that there are a huge number of Star Trek fans out there. And,
For sure. Yeah, exactly.
And so catering to them is not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah.
And interestingly, they've caved to some of the sort of what I think was probably fan pressure with the Klingons. They've started giving them hair and that sort of stuff. Yeah.
And where you were talking about getting in a younger audience, I've actually managed to get my teenage son to watch Star Trek now because of Discovery.
Tying your son down to a chair
Oh, I don't
doesn't count as making
Don't
him
have
watch
to
the
tie him down. He basically gets to laugh at his father when his father's going about things in Discovery. I mean, the Klingon nudity and where I'm just sort of going, and my son going, yes, this is definitely not my father's Star Trek.
Oh no, there's a lot of changes to the show. One of the most noticeable changes is the increase in violence. There's more blood in this show, probably in the first few episodes, and then probably the entire Star Trek series, is all of them span in the past 50 years. And
And the
that
language.
actually, sorry?
And the language.
And the language. Oh yes, of course.
I think
and
we've had one use of the F-bomb.
two.
No,
two.
there've been more,
It was
yeah.
two. It was two, and they were right after each other as well, and that caused a bit of controversy. But with the violence, it did alienate a lot of the older fans. They said, "Oh no, this isn't the Star Trek we were used to. It's kind of a bit too radical, too different." Whereas on the same token, people who are a bit more open-minded or newer fans actually jumped on board because it's actually a more modern show. So, so you can't please everybody, it would seem. And
and that was never going to happen. We were
No.
they were never going to be able to please everybody. But I think what I like about it, I think, is that it feels to me like it's Star Trek grown up.
yeah.
Like the original series was all PG, and then sort of Next Gen and DS9 and Voyager, sort of bits of it gradually grew up a little bit. But I think this is a bigger step. I
Yeah.
think it's a bigger jump between what we've had in the past and what we've got now.
Might be
I
classed
like
as
it.
too big a jump. Depending on
people think
yeah,
so.
and that's fair enough too. So, but it is what it is, and for that reason, a lot of people are sort of getting on board with it, whereas others not so much. So, but I mean, you can't fault them for at least doing something radical and different. And where I was saying earlier that H and I disagree on something, he's actually a fan of the second season. I actually preferred the first season. Myself, I actually thought it was a much easier story to follow, and I did like the Klingon element. I thought that was actually really, really good. The only thing I had a real problem with, was the whole spore drive concept. So if you're watching this and if you've never seen Star Trek Discovery, imagine having something you put into your ship where your ship could just instantaneously appear anywhere in the universe at any point. And my biggest issue with that was the fact that the Federation, with that technology, would have done anything they could have to ensure they didn't lose it. Because if you watch Star Trek Voyager, they could have had the Voyager back home in the first episode.
Yeah.
So it's just like, from a military advantage, it's the kind of thing where they would say, you know what, we don't care what we do to Stamets, we'll rip him apart if we have to. We can't lose this ability.
Yeah, that
and
comes back to something that was established further back after the whole ordnance crisis in Enterprise, where they were looking at genetically engineering superior humans, and then the Federation basically said, no,
But
no more
I disagree.
genetic experimentation.
I agree with that, but I disagree with it in this instance because it is such a big advantage. It's like discovering nuclear technology in caveman era. So it is such a big deal that they wouldn't have
I
done
mean,
it.
then they discover that there's actually intelligent life within that mycelial network, that they are hurting by using
I
it.
agree with you. Most people would say, don't do it. But others, and when I mentioned Section 31 here, would have said, stuff that. We want this power regardless of the cost. And that's how I sort of looked at it. So,
well, the other thing is they didn't know if they lost Stamets, they didn't know whether they'd be able to get anyone else to fill that role. So there is an element of, this could destroy it. It's the whole, killing the golden goose kind of thing.
It was good plot device and it worked for the show. But if you're a fan of thinking, hang on, where was this in any other iterations of the show? It doesn't make any sense. And of course, they sort of explained it as they went along as to why it didn't go any further.
There are a few things like that I find they've tried too hard to keep the continuity. Like there are little things like there's a line that says nobody's allowed to talk about this.
Yes.
And it's like, really?
I mean, the whole Section 31 thing was handled in an interesting way. I mean, that it's originally introduced in DS9, and it's meant to be very much a covert ops.
Yeah. Now they've got their own badges and everything.
And now they've got their own badges,
don't
and
make
it's
sense.
operating as a out in the open sort of thing.
It doesn't make
and
sense.
I thought,
But somewhere along the way, I mean, in the timeline, they'll say, oh, no, we've got to go covert. Maybe those badges end up on eBay or Gbay. But someone buys one, sticks it on, and suddenly I'm a Section 31 person.
But
and
I
they
thought
go,
we're seeing something else, which is they actually brought in some of the novel writers into the writers' room for Discovery. And that's where I found it quite interesting. They introduced the idea of control from Section 31. And that was actually an element from a couple of the novels. We find out Control was originally a computer program to look for threats to the Federation. It was designed to analyse information coming in and say, look, this is the threat, you might want to do something about that. Somewhere along the line, that program became self-aware. It turned into an AI. And then it's been ticking along in the background of the Federation, influencing bits and pieces here and there. And that where they bring in Control in season 2, and it almost looks as if they're going to hint at it being a precursor for the Borg. And then they just change direction slightly to bring it back to just being this more covert AI.
Well, all I'm going to say is if you're a Star Wars fan, you'll know the quote, control, control, you must learn control. So how good is that? We could clearly talk about Discovery until the ends of time. But we are actually out of time. So you never know, we may come back to this, especially when season 3 kicks off, and we will definitely revisit the show again. But if you haven't seen it, give it a go. Be mindful, it is not the Star Trek you're used to, but if you're a bit open-minded or you don't mind a bit of blood and guts, and Klingons chowing down on Starfleet captains, that's the way to go. What can I say? It's worth having a look at. Anyway, that brings us to the end of the episode. If you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe on our channel and click the bell for all the latest updates and exciting news that's going on around the place. Next week, we're actually going to be discussing the new Halo TV series. Oh, how exciting is that? As well as another TV series called Black Mirror. So, upon reflection, I reckon that's a great idea to watch that show. So, with that in mind, make sure you stay in the zone and bye for now.